things. I guess I woke up thinking the one thing I wanted to say for sure, which we'll say at the end, is this beautiful, mysterious title. And to encourage you, which we will do again later this morning, to be who you are, lotuses in a sea of fire. Really, and I was encouraged yesterday by your reflections about the Bodhisattva vows about, I'm just going to keep doing this. That's what Tutu was saying to me. And let's just do it. You know, and I want to do it too. And it's hard, it gets harder, it doesn't get easier. Interestingly, they didn't tell me that long ago. To really be your lotus self, your true self, to who you are, a human being, a bodhisattva, a Christian disciple, a non-violent person, a satyagrahi, a peacemaker. And that's just the most important thing, and it's worth it. And one of the things I was reflecting on, and I saw it in the movie, which I hear you saying yesterday, and I was talking about with Joshin, about the Buddha got up and went into the world, and so did Christ. And that's also one of the things I want to urge you to do as you are going to blossom to be the full lotus person of peace and nonviolence, and then to go into the world of violence and war, and to teach peace and nonviolence, to be agents of social transformation. Speaking for Roshi, if I dare, I would say both of us do not necessarily like traveling the world and speaking. And we've probably spoken to many, 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 many people. And it's hard, but it is part of the lotus nature and the life, right? So I'm just inviting, and I saw that in the film. So I wanted to say a word about Northern Ireland and a story about forgiveness and the connection with nonviolence. I invite you then to reflect on the film and the weekend and what we were talking about, what I was presenting about, being nonviolence to yourself, nonviolent to all others and creatures and all creation, and being part of a global grassroots movement of nonviolence. And we were talking about Buddha and Christ and Gandhi. That's just helpful ways. I lived in Northern Ireland for a year we didn't know the Good Friday Agreement was going to happen. I got there in 97, was there through late 98. And I arrived in Belfast. This was like my residency, you have here, after you're in the Jesuits for 15 years, they send you off to some peaceful place in the world to renew. And I was sent to Belfast, right in the heart of the Troubles. I was there 1 hour and having lunch with Jerry Adams, the head of the IRA. I didn't know any of that was going to happen, and it just hit the ground running. It was powerful. So you remember in the film, Pat and Joe. Pat was the IRA guy who blew up the Brighton Hotel. I remember all of that. And he's thinking, Joe's father in the film is like her father's Wolfowitz, or Dick Cheney. That's what that guy is thinking. It actually was for the people of Northern Ireland. Those people, meaning that hotel, were doing great evil in Northern Ireland. And I was so moved by Joe, and that's what I wanted to invite you to reflect on, that woman who didn't have to. She not only forgave, seemed to me in her own way, doing her work, and then going out and teaching forgiveness and nonviolence. And I thought that was very powerful, and that's what I invite you to do with your lives. Not only to be a lotus, but to be a teacher of peace and nonviolence. Because later in the film, the poor Israeli Jewish woman who lost her beloved son had said that she heard her speaking and that inspired her to do that. And I find that very powerful, and I bet that's your life experience too, how the teaching can influence. And every one of us has power to do this. Every one of us can be Buddha and Christ, and Gandhi and Dorothy Day, teachers of peace and nonviolence. Someone asked me about the trainings of peace and nonviolence, and just to point out in the pamphlet, if you're not familiar with the methodologies, there's a great book called Engage. I think it's the best in the country. It's a 10-session workbook. And there's different versions of it, the Christian version, the interfaith version, if you want a non-faith version. You can do it in a weekend, do it on your own, bring in a trainer, and you role play how to respond non-violently. Because everything takes practice, and then later, you can, hopefully, you'll be more instinctively non-violent. And someone asked me to specifically mention that. It made me think of a time 3 weeks after September 11th, Daniel Berrigan and I and a few friends were in Union Square just before the bombing of Afghanistan. I'm working very hard at Ground Zero, the coordinator of all the chaplains after September 11th for the Red Cross. And we were holding huge banners, "Don't bomb Afghanistan, war is terrorism. Bombing Afghanistan will mean more terrorist attacks." I mean, like the size of that wall of banners. And there's 500,000 people in Union Square. And, my friends are bodhisattvas. They're Daniel Berrigan. And this poor young guy, about 23, a Marine, went insane and charged us, came running through to kill us, and announced that. He's screaming, "How dare you do this to a country? I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." And it came right to me. So we were holding our banners, and this one, I'm just sharing with you a story, and I think it was the years of training. What would you do if I killed you right now in front of you? And it just happened. I took an in-breath. Wasn't that your phrase? I felt the strong back on an open front. But this is only reflection after 30 years of training. And I said, well, I guess I'd die and I'd go right to Jesus and be with the saints and my family and be in paradise in heaven for eternity. I'm so happy. You, on the other hand, would be arrested and there'd be a long trial and a lot of people would want to execute you. And my friends and I would feel really sorry. It was the most incredible transformation. Put his head down. You could just see the weight of the world fall from him. He was a completely different person, and our friend went over and talked to him and said about the teachings of the banners, and he came back and apologized to me and the whole group. That happens, and it's happening with thousands of people who are being trained in it. And we are going to be practitioners of it and teachers and trainers of it, but we have our work to do. In Northern Ireland, oh my gosh, I went around and met all the families of the Bloody Sunday Massacre and took their stories and asked them questions about violence and nonviolence and forgiveness. And then I met with the Protestant families from the Enniskillen bombing. I don't know if you remember that in 1987, the IRA blew up. Oh, they were having their Veterans Day parade. The UDF loyalists. It's really not Catholic Protestant, and that's what the media calls it. So the IRA blew them up, and of course they killed the civilians, the children of the grandchildren who were watching their grandfathers march, and they forgave, and to hear their stories. And then I was I was asked to have a meeting with a group of former prisoners. So we met at the restaurant in the film on a Saturday from noon till 5 o'clock. And they said they just want to hear your stories about prison and nonviolence. But I knew something was going on. I didn't know what. So I talked at length about walking in, hammering on a nuclear weapon, facing 20 years in prison, doing nearly a year, and why? Because of the nonviolence of Jesus. Well, of course they're all devout Catholics. It turns out this was Bobby Sands' cellmate and the survivors of the hunger strikes. Some of you may remember that. These were the center of the IRA, the 2012, and they all cried. And when they told me about starving to death, losing their 10 friends, being on the blanket, which is the most awful protest I'd ever heard in my life. And they said, we could never do what you did. It's so much harder, but we will now go back to the nonviolence of Jesus. And Jerry Adams later said at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., that a year after the peace agreement, I didn't know this, heard it later, that he had been reading all my theology books on nonviolence, and it had helped him as a Catholic, secret Catholic, to finally go forward with this. I'm just sharing, I'm not saying anything about myself, that you just keep going, and like this woman in the film, Jo, who forgave. If you're still with me, my story of forgiveness, what happened to me, was my friend Billy, who was my teacher of nonviolence, was the longest person on death row in the U.S. We corresponded every week from 1980 until 1990, and I got a phone call. He'll be executed on Wednesday, and he wants you to witness the execution. By miracle, I was able to fly within an hour to Atlanta from California with 2 other friends, with 3 close supporters. And we said, well, we're going to do something. I called Mother Teresa, got her to call. In Georgia, with death row, they have the Georgia Board of Pardon and Paroles, 5 people appointed by the governor, and the language is to grant clemency. Okay, we're talking about forgiveness, social forgiveness. And it never happened in 144 years in the history of Georgia. 5 white men, Billy's African American, he was 19, he went into the drugstore 2 in the morning and totally drunk and shot and killed the 79-year-old man there. Suddenly came to, the wife came through. He fell to her feet, sobbing and apologizing from the first moment. He later told me that he was trying to get $10, and the government spent millions and millions of dollars trying to execute him. So Mother Teresa called the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles. That was an event. And we announced we were having 2 prayer services a day throughout the entire state in 7 days before the execution. And I was meeting Billy on death row every morning. There was a lot of driving around. And it happened. There would be hundreds of people in every church praying for the miracle of clemency. This was my theory. Saturday night, Macon, Georgia, packed church. Somebody brings a letter from death row from Billy. It's 5 of 7, and I'm about to lead this service. Very political Christian language about let's have a miracle of clemency that Billy not be executed. It's from Billy. Dear John, thank you for all you are doing for me, but please stop it immediately. I certainly do not want anyone speaking on my behalf about clemency and forgiveness when you and all these people have not granted clemency and forgiveness to people in your life. If you were about to be executed in 3 days, would you tell the only 3 people who were with you to stop your public work on your behalf because you haven't granted forgiveness? Do you see what I mean? That's such a profound teaching. And so we canceled the prayer service, and I stood up and just read the letter. I said, we're going to sit in 45 minutes of silence. And I invite you to bring to mind viscerally everyone who ever hurt you in your whole life. Every moment, let's enter into it. And then we're going to stand, and we are going together, and I wrote out a 2-sentence thing which we memorized. Pretend we're the Georgia Board of Pardon and Paroles, and say, I hereby grant clemency, general amnesty, total forgiveness to everyone who ever hurt me in my life. Please give us a miracle of clemency for Billy and for us. It was one of the most profound experiences of our lives. And on Tuesday, the Board of Pardon and Paroles granted Billy clemency, and he was released a couple of weeks later, and he's alive and well in a prison chaplain in Georgia today.
Wow.
Longest person on death row, and probably the greatest bodhisattva I know. So there I am in Northern Ireland doing my residency program, and I was on the second 30 silent day retreat of my life. We do 1 or 2 8-day silent retreats, and every 15 years a 30-day silent retreat. And it's coming back to me, because in Northern Ireland, the resentment It's 700 years. I probably shouldn't say that, but you know the old joke of Irish Alzheimer's is you forget everything but your grudges. And I met many people who say, it's not just the occupation, it's what they did in 1433. And you can't believe, but you could see the pain and the anger on all sides. 700 years in their bodies, the resentment. And so all the killings that was happening while I was there, and you didn't know the Good Friday peace agreement was going to happen. But by the way, I saw how nonviolence can work between nations, because the U.S. and Britain forced both sides to sit down. And I know a lot of people who were involved in that, and they didn't want to do it. But when you force nonviolently dialogue, you fund a peace process, it can work. And I've been there many times since. It's very, very different. They have a lot of work to do. So I'm on the retreat, and I'm thinking about forgiveness. And I thought, I better revisit that Billy teaching. I'll just make a little list of the few names of people that I need to grant clemency. When I got to 75 names, I knew I was in trouble. And that's why I said yesterday about Jesus saying it was a daily thing, at least for me, to really consciously do that. For me, it's a daily practice for nonviolence, especially, it's the people close to me who are very upset with what I'm doing, and the church leaders who I have a hard time forgiving. That's my experience. I've been through, thousands of judges and jailers and police officers and parole officers and other officials. I don't even know what they're called, but I have lots of encounters. I have no problem with them. I just feel infinite compassion. Because that's what they do. And the people who've interrogated me around the world, it's not a problem to forgive them. Or it's not even forgiveness. It's the people up close. It's the church people who should know better, the church leaders, that I get stuck like the people in the film. So I have a practice of writing down the names and journaling over and pretending I'm the Georgia Board of Pardon and Parole. I hereby grant general amnesty and clemency, forgiveness to the following the following who do not deserve, who are just infinitely lovable, and I forgive and grant clemency. And wow, it works. Because regularly doing that, I feel transformed and disarmed, so that a lot of that moves on. But if you're going to continue publicly speaking out, there's new layers of people who come onto the list. I'm just sharing, my struggle. And I invite you to think about that, I invite you to reflect on who is it you don't want to forgive. How do you forgive? What is the connection between forgiveness and the life of nonviolence? Becoming a peacemaker and a bodhisattva. What did you learn from the brave, beautiful people in the film? The great woman from Rwanda who forgave. How can we be instruments of forgiveness and healing and nonviolence to fulfill our lotus nature and be teachers, real practitioners of compassion?